Our next speaker probably doesn't need much of an introduction. I'm sure you all know who Scott Guthrie is. He is the Corporate Vice President of the Developer Division at Microsoft and all things Azure. Scott, some of you might not realize is Scott is very instrumental to Outercurve being here in existence. He was a very big champion of our organization in the early days and continues to be so. So we're very happy to have him here. We hope you're loaded with lots of questions for Scott. I know there's one particular request that you're likely to field today, but I'm not gonna let the cat out of the bag unless someone else doesn't talk about it in the Q&A. So Thanks again, Scott. Welcome.
Cool. Thanks. Thanks for having me. As Paul mentioned, it's great to be here, both in terms of having a chance to talk, but also, it's kind of nice to reflect on where we've been and kind of how far we've come. There's still plenty more to go, but in terms of looking at where Outercurve is today, and I think some of the progress in terms of making more projects at Microsoft open source, and more importantly, enabling kind of deeper collaboration from external projects with Microsoft employees, with projects that start at Microsoft, and then include folks from the community. It's great to see kind of the early beginnings, and I think we need to do it even more. What I thought I'd do is I was going to spend just a few slides talking about Windows Azure, specifically in the context of openness. So I'm not going to do a bunch of Azure demos, but more just talk about kind of philosophically how we think about openness and open source, and set a little bit of context in terms of why we think things like Outercurve and open source are super critical, and kind of how they're shaping a lot of our strategy going forward. And then what I thought I'd do is open it up to kind of an unplugged Q&A session, and kind of make this talk dynamic and on the fly based on what people actually want to hear, and allow you to take the talk however you like. I think we have 30 minutes total. So, in terms of kind of, at a high level with Windows Azure, one of the things that we did last summer was to kind of revamp it quite significantly. It started really as a Windows, primarily proprietary cloud platform a couple of years back. And one of the things that we've tried to do over the last 12 months really is change it in a couple of significant ways. One is just from a flexibility perspective, enable more solutions with it in terms of enabling both platform as a service as well as what we call infrastructure as a service, where you can run generic VMs, and just in terms of the richness of the capabilities that we provide, so that you can do lots of different things. We also kind of spent a lot of time really focusing on openness, and making sure that you can basically use anything with Windows Azure. So you can use all languages, all technologies, all operating systems, all databases. And then at the same time, from an openness perspective, really kind of look at how do we not reinvent the wheel, and wherever possible, how do we leverage what already is there, and really incorporate it into the product and hopefully make it even better, so that we have kind of an end-to-end experience. And this isn't just about being able to use off-the-shelf things, but it's really about deeply integrating those capabilities directly into the product in a meaningful way. And last night, as I was kind of writing these slides, I sort of said, oh, what are some of the things that we have where we've done that? And I thought, hey, I could talk about 2 or 3 examples. And I started writing the slide, and it was actually kind of nice because I ran out of space on the slide. In terms of just some examples of how inside the product we're doing that now. And you're going to see this continue and grow even more in the future. Some of them are at the operating system level. We now directly in the product allow you to select multiple Linux distros and deploy them. I was demoing this to someone who used to work at Novell in the 90s and yesterday, and he kind of just paused and said, whoa, this is definitely a new Microsoft. And the fact that you can we even have pretty logos for all of them, and you can basically stand up your own Linux distro at any size anywhere in the world in seconds. But more specifically than just OS, one of the things we really try to do from a protocol perspective throughout the stack is really try to integrate with existing open standards and open protocols. So again, it's not just lift and shift existing technology, but really kind of embrace things that are already there and make them interoperate in a much more meaningful way. All of our management APIs are moving to an OAuth 2 based model as an example. They're all REST and JSON based. We're adding OAuth 2 and SAML 2 support to our Active Directory capability inside Azure. And one of the things that's going to enable, and it's going to be pretty cool, is that you can basically now take any language, any framework on any cloud platform, and in the same way that you can integrate Facebook authentication into that app, you'll be able to enable enterprise single sign-on with your Active Directory. And it's not a new library. You're not downloading a new SDK. You basically use the same OAuth kind of handshake that you use with Facebook or Google or Twitter login in order to enable that. We're about to release support for what we call Amqp, which is an open protocol for messaging. So if you're interested in pub/sub messaging or any type of queuing technology, all of our service bus messaging technology that we run as a PaaS service inside Windows Azure, meaning you don't have to have your own VM. You can just say create a queue or create a topic, which is a pub/sub mechanism. You can now take a JMS client running on Linux. You could take a Ruby client using RabbitMQ, and you basically just point the connection string at us, and you don't have to download an SDK. And you now have pub/sub interop where you can have .NET on one end, you could have Ruby on Linux on another, you could have Java somewhere else. And again, it just sort of seamlessly interops in a very open way. And likewise, our caching solution that we provide on Windows Azure, we have a very rich distributed caching mechanism that provides features like high availability and a bunch of other features that Memcached doesn't have today. But what we've done is we've implemented the Memcached wire protocol. So again, you can take an existing application that's written against the Memcached driver, just update the connection string to point to ours, and it works. And again, the main goal here is how do you enable kind of interoperability. On the framework then side, we've then kind of reached out and again try to figure out how do we not introduce our own MapReduce engine? How do we embrace the Hadoop ecosystem that's already there, whether it's Hive and Pig and all the other sub-frameworks that are there, and add .NET support to it. So that you don't just have to write MapReduce jobs in Java now, you can also write them in .NET, but again, leverage that full Hadoop ecosystem in order to do it. I saw someone with a Node.js shirt on, a friend from New York. We've kind of made sure that you can actually use things like Node.js, PHP, Python, and ASP.NET, which is now open source, in that list of technologies as well, without having to deploy a binary, without having to copy and download something special. You can literally create a website, upload a PHP or Python or Node.js or ASP.NET file, and it just works out of the box. NuGet, which is, we got some folks here from the team, is kind of core to how we distribute our SDKs. We also use NPM for Node and other technologies like Maven for Java and things like that. Git and Mercurial are now built in so that you can do source control publishing. Again, it's not the Microsoft Git, it's not the Microsoft Mercurial. We're using the standard ones out of the box, enabling anyone on any client in order to do source control deployment and continuous integration. Obviously with CodePlex, we're kind of embracing our open source ecosystem and the .NET open source ecosystem. We also like Phil back there, and so we've added GitHub support, just for you, Phil, and enabling kind of continuous deployment from both of those as well. And then obviously in terms of from an apps perspective, whether it's with Orchard and Braco, .NET Nuke, WordPress, we now populate those directly in the gallery. So again, you can kind of, with just a few clicks, basically have any of those solutions up and running and scale out in the cloud. And then again, from a development experience, we do support with our mobile SDKs a number of non-open platforms like iOS, but we do also support Android, Eclipse, Java, and a variety of other client languages. So anyway, this is just sort of a quick kind of summary of a couple of examples, so people don't think openness is just hopefully a buzzword that we like to bandy around. We are really trying to make sure that from a product perspective, we really embrace both what customers are using, but more importantly, again, try to not reinvent the wheel, make sure that we can take the best of openness and the open source community, all the different communities, and how do we also take the best of Microsoft and put that together. And we think that combination and the ability to use the best of open source, the best of Microsoft, the best of infrastructure as a service capabilities, and the best of PaaS all together ends up being hopefully a pretty special thing, and that's kind of what we're trying to do overall with the platform. In terms of kind of also just then from a development perspective, the other thing that we've really tried to do on the openness front, and you're going to see us do this even more, is support lots of different dev centers and languages. And so we now do have SDKs for everything. We actually just released a Ruby one 2 weeks ago, so I should update the screenshot. And so you can basically use all the features across the product in these languages. And then probably the most significant thing we've done is released all of our SDKs under an Apache 2 license. And we're actually hosting it right now in GitHub and enable pull requests from anyone in the community. And again, going back to the openness, try to not just talk the talk, but really make sure that we're transparent in how we do the development and enable anyone to basically get the latest fixes as they're being checked in and be able to contribute back if they want to. One of the things that we've tried to do, and it's I think when we first tried to get started, people were like, "Well, are we really going to do this?" Is actually say the live branch is actually in the community. Let's not have it be snaps once a month of this code, but like actually how do we move so that the Microsoft developers are checking in to main or master directly in the community branch. And I think we've kind of now made that transition, and it's actually been a win-win, I think, not only for external folks that want to contribute, but it's actually tightening up our feedback loop significantly within the product team, and it basically means we can get feedback immediately as a result. And we've seen some wins on this on the Azure side. I'd say we're seeing even more significant wins on this on the ASP.NET side with projects like MVC and Web API and Razor and NuGet. Where we're able to get kind of real-time feedback as part of it. And hopefully you're going to see us do this even more across these products, but also more within Microsoft. So that was a little bit high level in terms of openness and kind of how I've been thinking about that. What I thought to do, since we have another 15 minutes, is open it up to questions and make this hopefully more interactive and kind of take the conversation wherever you want to go. Oh, cool.
Love Azure, and it's a great combination together. The most recent version of Node.js you support, CF084, which came out in July 2012.
Mm-hmm.
So it's looking a little stale. So this open source thing, is kind of a two-sided sword. In particular, they've come out with a major update, the 10 release back in March. Still, isn't there.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. No. Yeah. You certainly can from an SDK perspective. I think we're actually one of the things that we've, the fun thing of supporting everything is how do you do versioning, and so the feature that's kind of coming is the ability for you to select which version you want to use, so that we don't roll you forward inadvertently and break you. And so send me a mail on that, and I can find out the exact time frame. I know I've seen check-in mail about that, so I think it's imminent. And the goal there is again, at an app level, you can actually configure which version you want to use, specifically with websites and with mobile services. Obviously, if you're using infrastructure as a service or you're using even our platform as a service, you can embed the Node runtime as part of your app. But it's specifically like websites and mobile services right now where we pre-install it. And then what we're finding out is, we kind of need to make sure that people can select multiple different versions, and I know that's on the roadmap, but send me a mail, I can find out the time frame for you. Yeah?
I got a question. It's not really Azure related as much as it is other products in developer land. Things like Small Basic, which was a great idea for introducing kids to to programming and whatnot. It got published, and then it sat on a shelf for the last few years. Is there any chance that stuff like that could get open sourced?
It's a good question. I mean, I don't know the specifics on Small Basic. That wasn't something I was kind of directly involved in, or I'm not even sure where it came from.
It came out of DevDev somewhere. It was just basically a project somebody did on their side, and that guy's no longer with Microsoft.
Okay.
So literally nobody sit and touched it.
In general, I mean, different teams kind of have different philosophies. I mean, generally, the philosophy I kind of push is, if there's no reason not to open source it, open source it by default. And that's even true for our frameworks. I mean, I think, originally we were talking about, what do we open source on Azure or even on the ASP.NET side? People were trying to figure out like, hey, do we do this small thing? And it was kind of, unless there's a good reason not to, let's just do it and not worry about it. And I think it's panned out very well, both for ASP.NET and Azure that we've done it. Where it's a little bit harder sometimes is for historical code bases that have dependencies on other things in terms of building, or what we've ran into on the ASP.NET side that took us a few months to work through. I mean, it's easy, everything's solvable. Was actually our testing frameworks, and we sort of said it doesn't really make sense to say you can send a pull request if you can't run our unit tests, or more specifically, we really don't want a bunch of pull requests if you can't run your unit tests before you send them to us, because then we're going to end up being debugging everyone's random pull requests. And our unit test framework had a lot of internal testing framework dependencies, and so we ended up spending about a milestone just cleaning up those dependencies so that I think we switched to NUnit or XUnit, for the public one. So I don't know specifically on the small base, but as a meta thing for some projects, that either if the people aren't there anymore or there's a dependency on some other internal framework within the code base or library, that is sometimes, and sometimes the teams don't philosophically have the same openness perspective. And it is one of those, I think it's true both at Microsoft and other places as well, and even for personal projects where, if you've only got so many hours in the day, how do you prioritize? And so, sometimes the things that you've decided you're not doing anymore, it's hard to kind of allocate a huge number of resources to kind of sometimes clean up. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't, but I just try to provide a little bit of context in terms of sometimes why it doesn't happen. But I think the other thing that we're trying to do, ironically, when we first open sourced, say, EF and ASP.NET MVC and Web API, the biggest concern we had internally, and even with some of the customers that we talked to externally, was actually, are you killing it? And we said, no, we're open sourcing it for a good reason. And they kind of interpreted, well, everything Microsoft open sources, that's kind of the graveyard where you sort of send it to die. And so we've kind of been a little careful about not trying to go through what are all the things that we've killed over the years, flip it into open source, so that we don't kind of get this stigma of things that we're open sourcing are, on their way to the graveyard. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't now, hopefully people now know that we're serious about open source in a healthy way for a lot of projects, but that also historically was one, we were kind of strategic in some of the projects that we picked. And what we didn't pick, mostly because we wanted to make sure that people didn't get this sort of stigma of, as soon as it's open source, flee from using it.
Maybe you need a special license, graveyard license.
Yeah.
To make it very, very clear, that thing is dead, take it if you want it.
Yeah, I think probably the project that we did that with, and it didn't, from a feedback perspective, go super well, was probably some of the Iron languages. And that also was not me. Yeah. Well, I think also it's the, I think with some of the Iron languages, it was sort of clear, like, hey, we want to enable community collaboration. And I wasn't directly involved in this decision. I just sort of saw it from the sidelines. But it was, that they weren't going to be investing as many full-time resources in it. But it's sometimes a nuanced thing that's hard to explain. I think I think the Iron Python community has actually taken up the mantle, and I haven't used it recently, but I hear Iron Python is going well. I think Iron Ruby is out there in open source, and there's people supporting it. But my understanding is it hasn't kind of taken off as much. And part of it was just sort of the reaction to different, the community to the news. And it's the internet and blogging is sort of sometimes a blunt instrument that's hard to nuance. Doesn't mean we shouldn't open source other things more. I'm just trying to explain some of the concerns and context.
You have a lot of names up there, and all of those communities can have like very different ideals about how they do things. When you want to add a new name and you look around, and you might not have an expert on the team on how that community works and the way they would like their SDK written, or for example, How do you make sure you produce that with high quality and it's in a way that the community is not going to reject?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's important. I mean, I think, you know, as we think about, you know, supporting and kind of embracing different communities, I think it's super important to kind of manage that well. You know, both from a diplomacy perspective and then from a, you know, you kind of, what I don't ever want to be is sort of like people think we're just name throwing. You know, hey, we have this support. And one of the things I was kind of pretty hardcore about when we came to Azure is we had kind of these sort of random sample SDKs that various people had put together. And so we'd say like, hey, we have a Ruby SDK. And then you download it and you try to use it and it didn't work. Or you know, it didn't work with the latest stuff, or you know, you couldn't do this, you couldn't do that. And so we have tried to be kind of fairly hardcore about saying, you know, if we're going to do it, let's do it for real. And you know, we'll support anyone else that wants to do it. But if we're going to have an SDK, or if we're going to support a protocol, we really have to support it, and it's got to work well. And as part of that, you kind of have to integrate with the community because it's the only way it's going to work well. And so what we try to do for the different languages, as an example, you know, take Node.js. You know, we worked pretty deeply with Joyent in the beginning. We still do. And you know, before we announced it, before we kind of said we were doing it, we kind of flew down. I think they flew up, and I think we flew down and met with them and sort of just walked through like, hey, you know, is this something that you'd value and you're interested in? And if so, how do we partner so that not only does it work, but it works well? And so we've spent a lot of time, you know, really trying to get Node.js performance on Windows to perform at the same level, or sometimes even better than say Linux or others, and make sure that, you know, we're using NPM, we're using the norms, and you know, we hired several people from the Node community to help make sure that we did that. Yeah, I think generally when you reach out ahead of time and talk to the project owner or the project community leads and say, you know, we're interested in doing a partnership if you are, generally, you know, we found that I don't think anyone's ever said no. And generally, you know, people are kind of pleasantly surprised and happy when they, you know, we approach them that way. So so far, thankfully, we've had it. I think if they ever reacted negatively, I think we wouldn't do it. But you know, I think I've had dinner with, or coffee or lunch with, all the Linux folks, and we get along great. The Node folks, we've, you know, Guido's built ASP, or you know, built Azure websites. I think with Python, is my understanding, at the Python conference with some of the folks that work on the Python things, and you know, we have good relationships with the Git and Mercurial and folks like that. And, you know, we hate Phil, but no, kidding. No. We love Phil. Phil used to be on my team, so he's on GitHub, and we have a great relationship with the GitHub folks. Hence the reason we host our SDKs there. So.
I think we've got time for one more.
Okay.
Okay. Hi. I work in the security space, and I think Microsoft has done a great job of leading the cloud industry in support for you know, federated authentication scenarios like that. I think the flip side of that is that the bar right now is pretty low. I think a lot of companies just kind of click the Oath 2 checkbox and then move on. And so I want to say, on one hand, congratulations, but on the other hand, you know, keep pushing. And I guess I'm wondering with, you know, there's been buzz about the new directory in the cloud and you know, connecting Office 365 to other applications and that kind of thing. That sounds awesome. I guess I was just kind of curious if you could expand on that a little bit, you know, how you can kind of continue to crush the industry in that sense and not let the lack of competition hold you back on security innovation. If you wouldn't mind just talking about that for a minute. Thanks.
Yeah, well, we don't like to crush people. We like to warmly embrace with maximum impact. But no. No, I think in terms of from a, you know, I think one of the things that, you know, companies, you know, as we think about shifting to the cloud, I think often people focus on cloud infrastructure providers, you know, in Azure, Amazon, or so forth. And, you know, certainly that's one of the trends in terms of cloud adoption. And specifically for developers, that's obviously the huge trend. That's why we as developers focus so much on that. I think one of the things also from a cloud perspective that I think on the adoption perspective will end up being even bigger from both usage and revenue and customer impact perspective will be the embrace of SaaS-based solutions, whether it's Salesforce, Office 365, Dynamics, Google Apps, Workday. There's tons of these sort of applications and solutions. And if you're an enterprise or especially a small business or medium-sized business, not having to run your own VMs and install your software and maintain it, and instead just here's a website and I can go ahead and log in, is hugely, the return on investment is enormous in most cases. The challenge is how do you take 100 employees that have data that's often specific to the company, and once they put all that customer data up in the cloud, and if one of them leaves, what happened to that data? How do you make sure that they don't walk off with your customer records or your banking information or stuff that's really key to the corporation, and and how do you kind of control access to that? And then there's a whole bunch of just meta problems, similar to the early days of client server, where how many licenses have I bought, and how many employees do I have, and who's really using them? And Joe left, but Bob got added. Did we replace Joe's license, or did we just buy one, or did we forget to buy one? There's a whole bunch of interesting policy problems around just sort of SaaS management. We have some interesting stuff that is both out there today and even more interesting stuff cooking that will be out there soon. That will probably kind of look at that space. And so with Azure Active Directory, one of the cool things that we've done is enabled you to take your Active Directory installation on-prem, or you basically create a directory in the cloud. So if you don't have any Active Directory, you could go up to Azure, you can create one in about 10 seconds, and you can populate it with users. And so it's a secure directory. And what we're doing is enabling you to say, hey, I can use OAuth, I can use SAML, I can use a variety of other protocols to enable single sign-on within any of my apps. What's kind of compelling about it also is, we enable you to do that not just with your own apps, but also with third-party apps. And you'll see us start to extend it so that you could sign into any of the popular SaaS solutions using that directory in the cloud. And that suddenly means that, again, you can have all your employees in one place. When you suspend an account, they lose access to those SaaS applications, and you can monitor, which apps they're logging into, and see what the traffic patterns are. And then what's kind of really compelling about the Azure Active Directory stuff is it not just works in the cloud, so it's great for small companies or for companies that are cloud only, but it integrates with the on-premise Active Directory environment that most Fortune 1000 companies have. I think about 93% of Fortune 1000 companies have Active Directory on-premise. And what we let you do is effectively have one directory that works in the cloud and works on-premise. And so that way, if you've already got a directory set up, you can, in less than a day, have it synced with the cloud, start using it for SaaS, start using it for line of business apps, start using it for mobile apps on any platform. And again, have a single security model for all your employees everywhere. And whether you use smart cards, whether you use two-factor authentication with a phone, whether you just use username and passwords, it seamlessly works across that. It's all open protocol, so it's easy to integrate with any language, any framework, any SaaS solution. And I think you'll see this, you'll see even more about this, I think this summer. And I think it's gonna be pretty exciting. And what's cool also is, we kind of let you use all this stuff effectively for free. We don't charge for Azure Active Directory. If you have an on-premise Active Directory, you do buy a CAL, and so it works that way. So we do make some money. But we think this ability to kind of connect on-prem and the cloud and SaaS and custom apps ends up being a big win for developers. And it's kind of a unique thing that Azure provides that makes all types of apps a lot better. So you'll see even more about it. It isn't just a little checkbox. It does need to be real. As much as I'm excited to say that we have OAuth 2 and SAML support. I kind of think having protocols is great. Having apps that already exist using those protocols connecting to you is really the litmus test. And so, for me, I kind of view as, how do we get the top 1,000 SaaS solutions out there integrated with this? If I can log into GitHub using Active Directory, then I know that we've succeeded in making it fully real. And again, I think that's a win for our customers, it's a win for Azure, and it's a win for, for GitHub or whoever we integrate with, in that suddenly they have an enterprise security story that they can go ahead and sell to their customers. So, I think it can be a win-win for everyone. You'll see some more of that probably in the next couple of months. Cool.
We have one or two more minutes. Anyone? Because next up's NuGet. All right. Well,
Cool.
Thanks again, Scott, for sharing your insights,
Cool.
and we appreciate your participation.
Great. Thanks a bunch.